Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar from Kelso Consulting on successful blogging for law firms. Thank you very much to everyone who filled in the questionnaire beforehand. We'll be covering all sorts of things as we go along to make your practice's blog more successful. And I will also be sending a link to various resources with that. And if you are listening to the recorded version, do send any questions that aren't covered to me at this email address and I'll be happy to respond. Now, there's a lot of webinars on nowadays and I've been listening to quite a few of them. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but there seems to be an awful lot where people spend half the webinar talking about how wonderful they are. You will forgive me if I don't do that, but just do introduce myself. There are quite a few people on this who know me already. A very big welcome to you. There's a lot of people as well who don't know me. I'm a director of Kelso Consulting. We're a public relations agency. We build powerful reputations for our clients, and we certainly do a lot of work with the media doing that for legal, accountancy, tech and consultancy firms, financial firms as well. I've been doing that over 20 years, both in-house for the big accountancy firms and more recently, it's in the past 20 years for Kelso Consulting. I've got 4 national awards for PR campaigns I've devised and delivered for clients. And I'm the author of the book, The Thought Leadership Manual, an ideal birthday, Christmas and other present for friends and family. Kelso Consulting, we're certainly all about getting strong national media coverage for law firms and other clients. We're particularly distinctive for our approach to creating and delivering thought leadership campaigns, but we cover other areas such as helping our clients gain awards, get speaking opportunities at industry events, particularly the effective use of LinkedIn. Lots of people use LinkedIn, not many of them use it to its full potential. And indeed, we look after the blogging of some of our clients as well, whether ghostwriting them or and also managing the whole process. Now, why blog? And in particular, why should law firms blog? Well, I'm going to take everyone back to 1993 to the book Managing the Professional Services Firm, perhaps the seminal book on law firm marketing from David Maister, who many of you will be familiar with. He's effectively the management guru for law firms in particular. And in his book, which you'll have to remember came out before anyone was using the internet much, and most people have said, "What's that?" if you'd mentioned the name, he puts, "Marketing works when it demonstrates, not when it asserts. Marketing tactics that illustrates one's competence, such as speeches, seminars and articles, are infinitely more powerful." And indeed, if you look up David Maister now, he's effectively retired, but you will see he has a very active website, lots of blogs, lots of videos as well. And no doubt if the internet was around when he wrote that, he would have inserted blog in there along with articles. And during this webinar, I'll be using the term blog in its broadest possible meaning, not just something on your website called a blog, but generally online articles, whether they are in a purposeful blog or not. And indeed, although I won't particularly go into it, it could also apply to vlogs, that is video logs. So when you speak to video rather than you write it down. But I'll be using blog in the broadest possible context to mean some sort of online article on your website. Now, to my mind, for most professional firms, and particularly law firms, given that you're all about demonstrating your knowledge and expertise as a way of positioning you against your competitors, your website generally, but your blog, as in your online articles, should be at the heart of your strategy, and it should be one of the most important elements of your website. For some firms it is, for others it's a bit of an afterthought. That shouldn't be the case, and hopefully after this webinar you'll be emboldened to make your articles a much more active part of your strategy. They demonstrate your knowledge. We're in an online world where people do a lot of search before picking up the phone to a lawyer or anyone else. Your blogs in particular attract prospects to your website. Hopefully they will impress them. If they're not impressing them, your competitors' websites are impressing them. Another very powerful channel for lawyers is LinkedIn, and having blogs creates great content for resharing to the people most likely to give you appointments and referrals, and that's the people in your network, the people you're connected to on LinkedIn. Indeed, blogs are great content for reusing much more widely in your marketing, whether for emailing them to clients, to prospects, to copy pasting them into proposals, for all sorts of day-to-day networking, relationship building, social marketing and sales activity. The blog is the ideal platform. Ping them a link with "we've written something interesting about it" is a very, very effective way, both for your time for nurturing contacts, but also for impressing the recipients. Ultimately, having blogs on subjects relevant to your client creates credibility, engagement, and ultimately generates leads. Now, once upon a time, the strategy with a blog was to build up a long list of subscribers. I think those days are long past. It's great if you've got a long list of subscribers, but most people don't. And we've all subscribed to loads of things, and it has to be pretty damn tempting to make someone subscribe to your blog. Work on the basis they're not going to subscribe to it. Work on the basis you've got to put in the effort to distribute it, particularly through the means I was talking about before: search engine optimization, LinkedIn, email, whatever. So I've talked about why it's a really important marketing tool, but there's lots of problems law firms come across. You can see that when you go onto them, the content is old and cobwebby, or maybe it's just really lots of random ad hoc stuff. People often find it hard to come up with ideas. They have 3 or 4 great ideas, then they start to run out of them. They can't motivate people in the firm to do it, and ultimately to write a good blog does take time. If it falls on one person, or maybe it gets dumped on the marketing person, and quite frankly they're not lawyers. How can they be expected to come up with blogs on legal issues? It all starts to get very difficult. People start to treat it as an afterthought. It starts to show that it's an afterthought, and ultimately it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It creates little impact, and so enthusiasm for it wanes further. Now, I think a big problem here is that often people launch into blogs with a very poor raison d'etre for them. They're sort of done before because everyone's doing it, or maybe they just, there's a lot of pressure to put some random stuff up there, and they think, oh, well, we'll dump it in the blog because it's easy. And then suddenly people say, oh, we've got to put more stuff on the blog, and it becomes a bit of a random dumping ground. So I think the first thing is, if your blog is going to be successful, there needs to be a successful strategy behind it. And you need to be asking two important things. If you've not done them before, where does your blog fit in your practice's strategy? If it doesn't fit within your practice's strategy in an important way, well, it's not surprising if people don't want to contribute to it, and it's not surprising if you don't know if it's a success or not. So first of all, clearly and specifically, not vaguely as a nice to have, where does your blog fit in the practice's business strategy? And then secondly, it's all well and good for you to think the blog is important to you, but to your future clients or your current clients or your referrers, what is your strategy for making your blog compelling and distinctive to them? So compelling and distinctive they'll want to read it. That doesn't necessarily mean unique, because after all, there's lots of blogs out there, but in what way is it going to be compelling and distinctive? And we'll come on to that as we go along, because I think this is the important area, and there is a tendency for not just law firms, but including law firms, to post the same old stuff as their competitors. And if you're doing the same stuff as your competitors in the same way, you're never really going to get a very distinctive result from it. I would say it's probably better than nothing, but you're here to get a better result in your competitors, not the same result. So I think it's important for people to stop thinking of blogs as a dumping ground for all sorts of stuff and start thinking about focusing the activity. Indeed, I'd say you should have a charter for your blog, a written one as to why it's there and what goes into it. A lot of firms, and indeed some law firms, first of all, will have clear segments. Some will have gone on to produce some personas for who they're aiming at. So your blog charter needs to aim, yes, at these segments, but much better at the persona, right for the people in your persona. If you're not familiar with personas, they're a sort of archetype of the person you're aiming for. Who is your sort of perhaps idealized client, right for your ideal, and then you're going to be attracting the people you want to. I'll put a bit more about personas in the resources that I'll send the link to at the end, as we can't really go into them in the time available, but they're very important. And if you don't have a persona, you're missing out. If you do have a persona, make sure you're writing for it in your blog. Think about what they'll want to read. In what way is the sort of stuff you're writing compelling to them, distinctive to them? Think about your blog. What are your objectives and your purpose for it? What content are you going to include? Importantly, what content do you want to exclude from it? And think a bit about the frequency. How often are you going to aim to blog? And we'll talk about a bit more about frequency in a minute. In fact, we'll talk about it now. HubSpot, which is a blogging platform used by a lot of businesses, including my own, does a lot of research into the impact of blogs, because it's got all the data, because it manages a large number of blogs. And what it finds, and for most firms on this webinar, the orange column is the relevant one. It finds, perhaps not surprisingly, but notably, that the more frequently you blog, the more leads, the more inbound website traffic you get. This perhaps isn't surprising, but it's important to remind it, because if your target is to blog once a month, you're not going to see nearly the same effect as people who blog several times a month. And people who blog several times a week get far more traffic. But there's a bit more to it than that. But the same applies in terms of the number of leads. If you want your blogs to generate leads, then the more blogs you do, the more leads you get, according to the research from HubSpot, which tracks these things because in its software, people click on automated calls to action, and HubSpot knows about this. Now, my view is that this actually underestimates it, because as a law firm, you'll be familiar that many people pick up the phone when they want to speak to a law firm, which probably isn't captured in this data. So do bear in mind that this might be an underestimate. The other thing that's very important is the total number of blogs. The more blogs you have, the bigger the impact. Now, this isn't surprising, because if you write on topics that are a problem for a long period of time, what's called evergreen ones, you're going to be appealing to people searching for them now, but also your blog will be around in a year's time, 2 years' time, 4 years' time, and it will still be picking up leads then. In fact, it might pick up leads more, as Google likes blogs that, while it likes fresh content, it also likes blogs that have been around a long while. As an example, my most regularly visited blog, it gets more traffic every month than just about every other blog of mine, is one I wrote several years ago for law firms looking at whether retainer or project is the best way to work with a public relations agency. Now, that attracts far more visits each month. It was one I wrote several years ago, but it's an evergreen topic. People are still interested in project versus retainer now, as they were a couple of years ago. And also, I will highlight that as a PR agency owner who regularly gets asked that question, it was a very, very simple blog for me to write a lot about. But with the things I've been talking about, I would like to highlight something called Goodhart's law, which is something you must beware, which says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And so you have to beware this with all the things I've been talking about, and indeed all the other potential metrics. So let's give an example of this. So you might go away and say, oh, Tim said on his blog that people who post 11 blogs a month get far better results, so we must, hell or high water, have 11 blogs. Now, having 11 good blogs is very important, but having 11 rubbish blogs is going to actually not bring you the same sorts of benefits. In fact, it might create disbenefits, because people look at your blogs and think, oh, these are rubbish, we'll go with somebody else. And this is a big problem when you don't see this so often in law firms, but if you look at tech firm and SaaS firm blogs, this is a real problem. They've all been told that they need to get lots of blogs. They don't have the time to do it. They contract it out to a content marketing agency who hit the target of producing 4 blogs a month or 5 blogs a month or 3 a week, but it's all really superficial, shallow content that they've created by browsing around the internet, copy and pasting other people's stuff, and it stinks. And anyone reading it realises this. And I've had this certainly with accountancy firms where they've gone down this route, and then they've asked me why no one's engaging with their blog, why it doesn't have any traffic. And it's for the reasons I've just outlined. The content lacks bite. In fact, for anyone who knows anything about the subject, which includes presumably their clients reading it, it stinks. So if you're going to do blog frequently, but don't sacrifice quality over quantity. Having said that, what I would say as well is don't have an unrealistic level of quality for everything. Certainly they shouldn't be rubbish, but as we will come on to, every article doesn't have to be the most amazing bit of thought leadership output you can do if it only means you do them once a month. So I would apply a rule of thumb: monthly better than never, weekly better than monthly, thrice weekly better than weekly. But whatever it is, consistency is king. Have some sort of regularity to it and some sort of minimum level of quality and insight to it. So the next question you might have is a long blog better or a short blog one? Well, according to people who do this sort of research, Google likes blogs that have more content on them. So according to one bit of research I saw, the typical first page result on Google contains around 1,900 words on it. So that suggests strongly that if you want to be on the front page of Google, and quite frankly that's the only place that it's worth being for research, for searches, you need to write a long blog on the subject. The research I've seen also indicates that long articles tend to get more social shares to them, particularly in the B2B world, but not only. And indeed, that I was listening to an interview with a journalist for a broadcaster that does a lot of long form articles on their website, and they said that their long in-depth articles get far more shares than their short news updates as well. So it's something that has a lot of, certainly to my mind, credibility, that people are more likely to share long articles than short ones. And also, as a law firm, you'll be keen to demonstrate your in-depth knowledge, and there's nothing that does that more than a decent long blog. But of course the problems are that with long blogs they take a lot of effort. Shorter blogs allow you to do the frequency of volume, which brings search engine optimization benefits. They certainly are faster to produce, which is important when you're reacting to topical stories, important things, or indeed you have you need to get more blogs up because you haven't done them for a while. Quite frankly, it's easier usually to get others involved. If you tell everyone they've got to write 2,000 words on a subject, then quite frankly a lot of people are going to tell you they're too busy. Giving people a structure, an intro, 5 bullet points, 5 top tips on this, and a conclusion, quite frankly it's easier to get people involved with that. And a lot of people will think, well, short blogs do not show quality. This is complete nonsense. You can say an awful lot of important and insightful things with 450 words. Not everything needs to be an essay. Indeed, your clients will welcome the having short blogs there that they can skim with the key nuggets to it as well. Indeed, many of the most important historic documents that have gone down through the generations have not been long documents. They've been short and punchy speeches and documents. Just think of the 10 Commandments. Another issue for many is coming up with ideas. I'm going to run through this bit because actually coming up with ideas, once you get into it, can be very easy. a really good starting place is the sorts of questions your clients ask. In fact, this is really, really important to do blogs on the questions your clients ask, because they're the sorts of things that people search, and also Google is keen to put people searching in direct contact with articles that give them the information. So after this, if you were to search, do some searches on topics, you will find a high incidence, in fact very high incidence, of Google prioritizing blogs that directly answer the question the person is doing. So the first thing is, if you have a blog answering the questions that people are searching for, Google is going to give it a high priority. And indeed, the example I gave earlier of my blog. So if your clients are asking it, other people are asking it on Google, Google is going to be keen for your blog to feature prominently. You'll also come across a lot of mistakes your clients make. Clearly you don't want to name and shame your clients, but again, useful blogs on this sort of thing you will find start to get start to generate traffic, etc. But if you're starting to run out of ideas, there's a blog topic generator from HubSpot. You put in 3 nouns, it comes up ultimately with about 250 suggestions. I would say probably 2 out of 5 of them are rubbish, 2 out of 5 are not bad with a bit of tweaking, and 1 of them is bang on. So look at that. If you're a slightly perhaps larger firm and you want to track hot topics in your particular areas, BuzzSumo will do it. If you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer that goes out to these networking events like BNI and things like that, why not ask at your next working event? Failing all of this, you can get back to the good old way of brainstorming with colleagues, employees, family and friends, and commenting on what's in the industry papers for the targets the sectors you target, or indeed what's in the national newspapers. Recently I did a webinar that was all about thought leadership while being furloughed, and I highlighted a few approaches to thought leadership which are also useful to your blogging approach as well. One approach to being a thought leader is to be the technical expert, and this is the one lawyers naturally gravitate towards. Let's write something insightful about this legal issue. There are downsides to being the technical issue, not least that many of your business clients probably don't want to read technical items. So it's worth thinking about other approaches. One is the informed industry commentator. If you are an expert in a particular sector, or you're knowledgeable about it, or indeed maybe you want to talk about broader issues, this is a really good place to be, and we'll come on to that. Interestingly, I was listening to the radio this morning, Jazz FM. Can't stand jazz, but one of my clients is going to be interviewed on it tomorrow, so I was checking it out, and there was an advert on it from Mishcon Dorea talking about transformation. In fact, the advert never mentioned the word law firm, lawyer, solicitor, or anything to suggest that Mishcon are a law firm. It was all about attracting businesses that are it's effectively looking towards tech businesses, but it didn't mention tech. It was talking about transformation. So they're setting themselves up as experts in that sort of area. You often find that some of the bigger firms, they will do stuff around M&A without particularly getting into the legality, the technical legalities of it. So think about it. Just because you're a law firm, doesn't actually mean you need to blog on the law, although it is a very good starting point, as you'll know lots about it and people will be searching on it. A radar is one where you simply scan for interesting news and insights relevant to your targets, and you blog about those, or maybe you do some sort of compilation or link to them. This is a good strategy because actually you can delegate that one down to maybe the marketing team or maybe one of the solicitors, but it's not something that an expert needs to be doing all the time personally. The same with an aggregator where you do a weekly update of interesting developments in whatever the sector is. Again, that's something that can be delegated down. A connector is one where you sort of get insights in two different areas and compare and contrast. And Wimbledon one is where you host the best competition but don't have the best players, which has been the case for Britain for many years prior to Andy Murray and probably after him. You don't have the best players, but you host the best competition. And in a law firm's case, that might mean you have some interesting interviews, interesting case studies, perhaps some interesting discussions written up. So you're effectively gaining a halo effect by having some great content, even if it isn't necessarily your own. So those are worth thinking about. What makes a successful topic for a blog? If you've got tons of ideas, which actually if you do the things I was talking about, easy to come up with. And I would suggest that a good thing to think about is you want blogs that intersect in three areas right at the centre. Is it an area of law where you practice employment, property, intellectual property, whatever? Does it affect a target sector? Now, when I say a target sector, it's no good saying all SMEs. That is not a target sector. That is 95% of all the businesses in the country. And if your target is all SMEs, it's going to be really bland. So don't write for all SMEs. Start picking off particular segments if you don't do so already. Or maybe if you're a local firm that does target all small businesses in an area, start talking about the geography. So at least you're getting a geographic benefit, if not a sector benefit, although I would still urge you to start writing for businesses that are particularly prevalent in your geography. And then tackle an important question. So, and the reason for this is, first of all, by doing this at the intersection, it makes the blog very relevant to the people who find it, which is important because if it's not relevant to them, they won't find it, and if they do find it, they won't be very engaged by it. Whereas if you are writing blogs that are at the intersection of three areas, first of all, they're more likely to find it via search, they're more likely to be interested in it when they do find it, and they're more likely to have the sorts of problems that you're able to deal with and get in contact with you by being impressed with it. Another thing I just want to highlight, law firms, but also other professional firms, are particularly bad at creating content, using it once briefly, and then forgetting all about it. The amount of times I've seen people do thought leadership projects and they write one blog and one tweet on it and then move on. If you've done a thought leadership project, and I think a lot of people on this webinar have, quite frankly, you should be getting 6 or 9 months of content out of it, not 6 or 9 days worth of content out of it. So if you've done stuff, not just recently, but in the past, go back and reuse it, recycle it, reuse it, repurpose it. But not just that, if you've been doing seminars, presentations, webinars, again, you should be reusing it. When I finish with this, I will run this webinar through a bit of transcription software, and I will use that as the basis for several blogs. As an example, you can do the same. If you've done presentations for clients, there must be some material in that can be reused. If you've done articles for PR or other purposes, start repurposing them within the blog. How do I keep it going? This is a key question for many firms. And for that, take a lesson out of the world of journalism. If you don't have an editorial calendar, do have an editorial calendar, and do start diarising ideas. Put it in people's diaries, have particular topics. That doesn't mean you can't, if someone suddenly wants to do something else, you can't switch things about, but do have an editorial calendar where you know that someone's going to be delivering a topic, and do have suggested topics for them if they can't come up with a better one. Also think a bit about how people like to work. If you're the person writing a blog, are you a night owl, or a lark? Do you do it in the morning, do it at night, do it during the working day, do it in the evening once the kids have gone to bed? When is it that's best for you? And do delegate as much of it as possible, and even if you can't delegate the writing, perhaps you've got colleagues who can do background research and give you some interesting articles and stats to include in it. You've got people who can do the proofreading, the people who can do the posting, people who can do the social media sharing, but do think about having a ghostwriter. Now, there's a difference between having a ghostwriter who will interview you, which is the approach we take with our clients, and then perhaps elaborate it so it's got your distinctive insights and imprimatur on it, and also you know the key elements within it. I think that's a very good way of going about creating blogs. Quite frankly, reading a couple of articles, or drawing on your own insights, a 10-20 minute interview, someone writes it for you, a very good way of using your time efficiently. That is very different to go into a content marketing agency or a freelancer who writes it all on your behalf with no input from you, and that's the route to bland content rather than distinctive, powerful content. Engaging your team. So, with your team, I think the key thing is you need to start at the top and sell the big picture to them. It needs to be important to them. If it's not important to them, they're busy people. Why the hell should they do it? Make it easy for them, perhaps helping them with the topic, with the sorts of things we've been discussing about, helping them perhaps with training. A lot of people really don't like writing, or they find it a long process, particularly when they're doing it in a style that's unfamiliar to them, and blogs are an unfamiliar style for many people. So think about having a ghostwriter for them, or maybe a ghostwriter for the first few, and then they sort of get more into the feel of it. It's also worth remembering that within professional firms and other firms, all firms, but very much in the law firm, there is a huge amount of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is where people on the outside, they are confident and don't want to admit that they have any self-doubts, but on the inside they really have a lot of self-doubts. And actually this is very common, and for people, if people are constantly telling you they are too busy to write a blog, quite frankly this is nonsense. Either they don't think it's very important, or actually they've got a strong bout of imposter syndrome, and they feel that writing on the subject publicly is going to expose them, make them look weak. And actually, I find this is a big problem within law firms. So think about that as well. Often if people start saying things like, well, what if I say the wrong thing? What if people write something negative about it? What if I'm wrong? These are all signs that actually people are suffering from imposter syndrome. And the other thing as well, to motivate professionals, you need to give feedback on its impact. This clearly isn't negative feedback. If you want to give negative feedback, you need to give it quietly and delicately to people, but give people strong and positive feedback about the strong impact that their efforts are doing. Get the managing partner to praise them in dispatches. This sort of thing really motivates people. So I just want to, a lot of law firms are very into lead generation. Indeed, for a lot of law firms, a lot of lawyers, they mistake marketing and selling, and they think marketing is all about delivering them into their inbox someone who's desperate now to get them involved in their proposal. Now that's clearly a good thing to have. So let's talk about it, albeit generating leads now isn't the only criteria you should be talking about. You should be thinking about things, as hopefully the sorts of things I was talking about earlier demonstrated. Now, I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I got an email back from an accountancy firm partner. He said, I did a piece on LinkedIn, because I was saying, whatever you do, promote it on LinkedIn. And he said, I got 19 likes, 690 views so far. I've got a lead on a new matter, because he's a forensic accountant, so he uses that terminology, and half a dozen new connections, which he's going to be following up. And indeed will have followed up by now. Now, to my mind, that seems a pretty good initial impact from an article placed on LinkedIn. Which would also should have appeared on his blog. Indeed, maybe it was a blog that he repurposed there. So the first thing you do in terms of lead generation is make sure you're sharing it on LinkedIn. I can't go into all the sorts of things you can do on LinkedIn in the time available. I'll put a few extra resources regarding some of the things you can do in the follow-up. But above all, whatever you do with your blog, get it on LinkedIn and make sure your colleagues are liking, sharing, and indeed people are commenting on it too. LinkedIn goes to the people most likely to give you work, the people in your network. Secondly is making sure that whatever blogs are done are maximised for SEO impact. I can't go into that also in the time available, but there will be a separate video on this, a sort of director's cut extra bit for in the resources section. Of course, interest in the memorable content is key to maximising lead generation and having prominent sign-ups to additional valuable content. If you simply think people will read your blog, drift around your website, and eventually track down somewhere on the contact us page a form, that really isn't going to get you many leads from it. You need to take a leaf out of popular consumer websites such as, I don't know, Amazon and eBay and all sorts of other ones, where they make it very easy for people to get in contact with you, not just by phone, because ultimately people could be in all sorts of places where they don't want to phone you, or maybe it's just they're not ready to phone you at the moment, but they might well be ready to download something. That means you've captured their email address and you're suddenly in the marketing driving seat. Again, make your blog easy to skim. maybe someone doesn't want to read 2,500 words at the moment. I don't know about you, but if I suddenly see a very large blog, I think, oh, I'll read that later. And most of them, I probably don't get around to doing that. So make it easy to skim so people get engaged with it straight away rather than put it on the back burner. Have internal links to other content on your website so people start going around your website thinking how useful you are, start seeing you as a resource, start getting impressed. And think about the sales funnel. What is it that you want someone to do having read that blog? Make it easy for them to do that, and then think about how are you going to bring them in. Are you going to offer a free consultation, a free webinar? What is the process that gets them from just landed on your website, don't know you from Adam, through to you having a conversation with them? Okay, measuring impact. Now, I've certainly come across quite a few cases where people are putting lots of effort into blogging, really not sure what impact it's having, and ultimately this causes the blog to become less and less important to them. Now, I think this goes back, before I say, oh, use all X, Y, and Z measures, it goes back to what is the purpose for your blog. If your blog is all about SEO, then you need to have measures that look at that. If your blog is all about engaging with clients, you perhaps need a blog that's some measurements which are all about that. If it's all about building a reputation in a particular sector, think a bit more than just measures around bounces and clicks and things like this, and think a bit more about how you might be measuring the impact in terms of perhaps people coming back, people moving down the funnel, perhaps feedback from clients. So start thinking about the purpose of the website and think more broadly than just all the sorts of measures. However, for partners on this who don't get many metrics on it, they are there somewhere in the system. The one thing you can say about the online world is there is a shed load of information if you start tracking it and start accessing it. So really you should be getting somebody, whether it's the practice team or whether it's someone in your team, to extract the data, start analysing it and presenting it to you monthly, not least because that will start to tell you which blogs are being successful and why, and perhaps start to answer questions around why they're being successful. It will also allow you, if you've got reasonably up-to-date software, to have what's called A/B testing. That's where you have the same bit of content but with a couple of variations, maybe a different heading or different images or different wording, and the software will tell you which one is more successful, perhaps in terms of getting clicks from people signing up or whatever it is. So these sorts of things are available and they're there to help you make your blog more successful. So in terms of what software I use, as I've had a couple of questions in on that, I use HubSpot, which is an online integrated blogging, social media contacts, clever thing, which effectively combines all sorts of things together. So, for instance, it gives me all the information about a particular person in one place. So, for instance, if someone comes to my website, if they're on my contacts list or I've had some sort of engagement with them in the past, it will tell me in one place, what pages they've come to on the website, what links they've clicked in my email, what subjects they've been tweeting about, and did they retweet some of my content, the sorts of interactions we've had. It will be tell me if they've been on this webinar and things like this. It brings all that sort of information together. Why that's useful is because it allows me to see from when someone first made contact with me how they've developed along the pipeline and what bits of the marketing have been effective, etc., etc. So that's called HubSpot. Quite a clever and expensive bit of kit, but ultimately very useful and relatively straightforward to use. So I'll send a link to that in the resources at the end. And if you want to know more about it, give me a call. But there's other bits of clever software around that aren't as expensive as that, don't have the features, and quite frankly, you've unless you've got a really old bit of software, you've probably got a reasonable amount of information. Make sure it's being shared, used, and analysed. Okay, so I'm going to invite questions as we are getting towards the end. While you compose those, can I just say, in summary, if you're thinking, well, what should I do? Number one, have a clear idea of your target segments. Write a long article for your blog on a subject that's relevant to them. If you do nothing else, write a long blog on a subject that's very relevant to them. Have it well optimized and include images on it. Share it on LinkedIn. If you do it this week, brilliant. Why not diarise a time to do it this evening or at some point tomorrow? Post further articles on the same or related subjects, both short ones and, when you have the time, long ones, and start sharing out the work involved so that everybody starts to get involved, starts getting more confident, and it doesn't all become a huge burden on one person, because certainly writing and posting a long LinkedIn article can take the best part of a day if you do absolutely everything start to finish, whereas if you can share it out, somebody doing the images, somebody doing the pipeline, somebody doing the proofreading, some doing the research, it makes it far more manageable. Just to let you know as well, on the Kelso website we have lots of free resources, including recordings of webinars such as this on a whole range of other topics, particularly got quite a few relevant to law firms, and indeed I'll be sending further resources when I send through the recording of this, hopefully tomorrow. As I mentioned, we do a standard fixed price blogging service, which involves an initial workshop and mobilisation to create an editorial calendar, monthly blogging. Typically, people want us to do 4 original and persona-focused blogs per month, but we can do more if people want to pay us more. Based on that, we'll do 16 LinkedIn posts and 20 tweets to promote them and supply suitable images. And indeed, some people want us to post them on their website as well and manage that. So if you want to outsource a lot of the grind to us and getting it in high quality original articles rather than cut and paste clickbait poor quality ones, do speak to me at some point soon. Okay, questions. Right, I have one question here, which is, I have a limited amount of time, how to maximise my effectiveness? Well, I've covered a lot of these areas, I think, but to summarise, tackle the issues that are of most concern to your clients and prospects in your blogs. Now, but make sure they're an area where you have something distinctive to say. So, for instance, you might suddenly think, oh, well, everyone's talking about coronavirus, I'll write something about coronavirus. But maybe that's a good thing, because a lot of firms are posting information as almost as a public duty to their clients, and that's a good thing because it's making you very relevant to them. But I'd think a bit more broadly about that. Is there something that you've got that's distinctive to say about it? If you don't have anything distinctive to say about it, start thinking about areas where you will have distinctive things to say. Is it about people getting back to work, or is it something that's going to be a bit more timeless, so that you people find the blog relevant now, in the future as well. So think about the issues most important to your clients where you've got something relevant to say. Delegate as much as possible along the route, the ways I've been talking about, and do get clients involved. Do get colleagues involved. But when they say they're too busy, actually, it doesn't mean they're too busy. Maybe you could be busy today, but no one's too busy indefinitely. It means either they don't see the importance of it, or perhaps more likely they're a bit unsure and uncertain but don't want to admit it. Okay, that hits the allotted hour. I'll be posting answers to further questions on our blog and linking to it from the resources section. Thank you very much for joining me. Please do complete the feedback questionnaire we'll be sending to you shortly, and I look forward to seeing you again on future webinars. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good rest of the day.